Iruma was an ugly, disgusting, worthless loser who was bullied by his own useless parents that forced him to risk his life ever since he was a child. They never allowed him to attend school or have any friends, but instead made him clean up after their disgusting lives. And because they were too lazy to hold a job, they forced Iruma to become a criminal to earn their living. Eventually, he managed to secure a job smuggling illegal fish products across the ocean. But while they were in the middle of a dangerous storm, the giant fish began falling on his weak and worthless body. But before one of them could crush him, time froze in that instant, and Iruma was teleported to a different dimension in front of the Demon King. His parents had sold him off to the blood-devouring demon Sullivan, and while they traveled inside the demon world, Iruma realized that his life was about to end. However, the demon had placed him on a throne, and got on his knees asking him to be his grandson. His entire life he'd been alone, so he promised to spoil Iruma and give him everything in this world. After living a life filled with misery and torture, this was the first time someone would care about him, so Iruma decided to accept, and Sullivan instantly transformed the throne into a luxurious room for his new grandchild. Along with his new clothes, Sullivan told him that he'd be enrolling at the demon school. But because demons could smell human blood to eat them, Sullivan soaked Iruma with a purple liquid, and told him that he was glad he accepted, because if he didn't, he would have eaten him for dinner. The following day at school, all the demons flew above Iruma to enter the New Year ceremony, and Sullivan welcomed everyone as the principal of the school, and Iruma realizes that he's about to have the hardest school life. He begins showing embarrassing photos of Iruma to all the students, and instead of having Asmodeus give the welcoming speech, Sullivan forces Iruma to take his place. As he struggles to speak, all the students wonder why a weakling like him is representing their school. But a paper materialized from thin air, and Sullivan telepathically told Iruma to read the words on the bottom. So before everyone, he began reciting the words, but as he kept going, every single one of the students and teachers were shocked with fear. With each word, the mana in the room began to destroy the walls, and when he let the final word out, a green energy emanated around him. All the students screamed in shock, and one of the teachers told him that he shouldn't have been reciting the forbidden spell, as messing up a single word would have exploded his body. However, Iruma had no idea what the was going on, and the teacher congratulated him on being the only idiot to risk his life for a worthless spell, because its only effect was protecting him from falling the entire day. As he began walking off the stage, Asmodeus glared towards him and teleported him to the arena, saying that he will crush him to prove that he's the one worthy of representing the freshman class. With everyone watching them, Asmodeus launched towards Iruma with a fireball, and continued launching a barrage of attacks that exploded the building. Even though his powers exceeded every other student's, not a single shot was landing on Iruma, and Asmodeus began wondering why everything was missing him. By the time he was out of energy, Asmodeus wondered why he wasn't ever able to land a hit. But Iruma was the only one who knew how to dodge everything thrown at him after his parents had forced him to risk being killed his entire life. This was finally his chance to apologize, but all the students thought he was the strongest demon to ever walk their school, and thought Asmodeus was a coward. So after hearing all their screams, Asmodeus decided to take him down using his martial arts. But after launching towards Iruma, he evaded his attack and used his strength against him, sending him launching towards a girl. In the last moment before they would fall, Iruma grabbed onto him, and his anti-falling spell had activated. The only thing that remained after the dust settled was Iruma's body suplexing Asmodeus. The following day, Iruma knew his life would be over if Asmodeus faced him again. But in that moment, Asmodeus entered the room and walked towards Iruma, getting on his knees and pledging his life to learning from Iruma. By the following day, as Iruma arrived at the school, Asmodeus appeared before him and offered to show him around. As they walked through the school, Asmodeus told him that they were drawn into the same group and would be learning to summon magical beasts once they arrived. When they arrived inside the hall, Asmodeus told him that their success in the summoning ritual would determine the class they fall into, but said that their instructor was an ugly, horrendous moron who loved to fail all his students. As he let out those words, the door burst open, and the mean-looking instructor appeared before their eyes. He introduced himself as Caligo, and said that he would be directing them for the test. He told them that his duty was to determine how useless they were, and to kick them out of the school like worthless garbage. As he stared straight into Iruma's eyes, he threatened to destroy him for being too ugly, and said that he would kick him out of the school once he found his chance. If only Iruma had told the professor that he plays the sponsor of today's video, War Thunder, then maybe he would have passed the class. If your war machines look boring, customize them with thousands of anime skins while sinking down the enemy fleet in the most realistic vehicle combat game ever made. Take down the enemies with over 2,000 combat vehicles and pair them with the all-new waifu body pillow. Whether you're on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5 or the previous console generation, you can play this game in 4K, so you know I'm going to create an Ocno skin on a helicopter firing with her plot missiles. So what are you waiting for? Download the game for free through the link in my description, and claim the Body Pillow pack if you're new or haven't played for 6 months. But even if you've been rampaging the field on War Thunder, don't worry, because you'll still get the Body Pillow, and you'll be happier than this gloomy professor because he has to wake up to his ugly face every day.
Damn!
To explain the process of summoning a beast, the instructor decided to reveal a magic mirror. He said that their first duty was to draw a bloody circle on their parchment, and to hold it over a magic candle until a summoned beast appeared out of the smoke. When a girl asked if they could be attacked by their summoned beasts, the instructor vanquished the mirror as part of his weird demonstration, and said that their beasts would be destroyed if they failed to serve them. Before long, the first student put her parchment inside the flame, and managed to summon a cute monster. Within a moment, most of the students had summoned their own little monster. When it was Asmodeus's turn, he began to burn his parchment, and as the smoke rose before him, a dragon appeared, leaving everyone in shock. By the time it was Iruma's turn, he began to wonder how he would summon a beast since he has no magical powers like the demons. However, when he began to burn his parchment, he realized that this was his perfect opportunity of getting kicked out of the school, and thought that he would be allowed to return to the human world. As his parchment began to burn, a blinding light appeared before him. Before his eyes, a dark flame began to burn, and the instructor appeared before him as his summoned beast. At this realization, Iruma and the instructor began to freak out. The instructor told him to stop the spell, so Iruma tried pulling him out. However, when he failed to do so, he decided to push him out the other way. At that moment, everyone realized that the instructor had transformed into an ugly, disgusting pet. The demons thought that Iruma was a mystical being for summoning another demon, and Asmodeus offered to do his laundry every Sunday. The instructor grew angry and told Iruma to break the seal between them, but lightning struck him for rebelling against his master. Later that day, Caligo tried asking Sullivan to break their spiritual contract, but he told him that the contract could only be cancelled after a year had passed. By the following day, Iruma had grown famous around the school, and all the boys thought he was their new Andrew Tate. While heading to the class with Asmodeus, a ball rolled into the boxes before them, and a girl emerged before their eyes. As she flew towards him like a useless creep, she began telling him that her name was Clara, and said a whole bunch of nonsense that should not exist in any dialogue. However, when she began to arrange the boxes, Iruma thought she was the prettiest girl he has ever seen. Asmodeus told him that she was the school weirdo who was avoided by everyone because she was too disgusting and ugly. A senior appeared before them, and taking them as companions, he bound them in an instant and cast them away. Inside the courtyard, Clara asked them to play with her because she was too useless to have any friends, but Asmodeus suggested that they run away immediately. However, when Clara started pleading, her words pierced straight into Iruma's heart, so he agreed to play with her. Hoping to add more losers to her squad, Clara told Asmodeus to join the party, but he told her that he would rather give out his kidneys until Iruma managed to persuade him into joining their company. After hours of running around the yard like filthy children, Iruma and Asmodeus became exhausted, so Clara tapped her little pocket and summoned a drink and snack for Iruma, telling him that she has the ability to summon whatever she has seen. Just then, 3 seniors called upon her and demanded for their usual drinks. After they left, Iruma asked if they were her friends, so she told him that they often played with her, but in truth, she was only their human vending machine. She told Iruma that he was the only person who has actually played with her, and hoped to play with him again. By the following morning, a freaky bird alarm woke Iruma up, and he hurried to school because he was already excited about meeting his new friends. That day at school, they started playing again. When they were done, Clara summoned juice for them, but Iruma thought it was becoming too much. Inside the school, as Clara was goofing off, she overheard the 3 seniors calling her an ugly goofball who would soon be dumped like a bitter ex-wife. They only missed having her around because of her ability as a vending machine, and their words made her sad. When she met Iruma in the courtyard, she decided to give him a lot of gifts, hoping he would continue to be her friend forever. However, when he tried telling her that he did not need her gifts, she began to cry, saying that no one wants to play with her unless she buys them off with her gifts. Iruma told her that he would remain her friend, and said that he has no desire to continue taking her gifts. Touched by his kind words, she began to roll around in excitement like a useless nuisance. As the three seniors arrived, they demanded for new drinks, so Clara summoned an entire vending machine, and planted one of them into the ground for their time. The following morning, Iruma discovered that Asmodeus and Clara were waiting outside his home, and Sullivan was glad that he was starting to make some new friends. However, Iruma was uncertain about calling them his friends, and wondered if a human could befriend demons without getting eaten. At school, as Iruma and his friends tried to have lunch, a mountain of food was served before him, having been ordered by a rival group of students. Before they knew it, Iruma finished off the food like a glutton, and everyone wondered if the food went through his body. Iruma continued devouring more food as it was served until all food was finished inside the cafeteria. As Caligo walked inside, he came across Iruma. Angered by the sight of him, he threatened to annihilate him once their summoning contract was broken. But when he began to leave, Clara held him back, saying that she wishes to see his true form as a summoned beast, and told Iruma to grab a magic sticker and clap his hands. As he did so, the instructor transformed into the ugly pet, and all the students were left in shock. That afternoon in the courtyard, Clara told Aruna that they would be moving into a new class the following day, and hoped that they would all remain together. Hearing her words, Iruma decided to ask if he could call them his friends, but they had never heard that word before, and Asmodeus wondered what it meant. He told them that their friends were the people they chose to hang out with, so they agreed to become his friends. The next day, while having breakfast, Sullivan told Iruma that he had selected him for the Misfit class since he asked to be unnoticeable in the school, and Iruma thought it was the best decision in the world. While walking off to school, Asmodeus wondered why he had refused to fly with his wings, and thought that he merely wishes to strengthen his legs by walking. However, Iruma was too afraid to give him an answer. At school, they discovered that they were all chosen for the Misfit class, but Iruma was worried that he would not survive for long in the demon world. As they headed down a cave, Iruma realized that the class may become his worst nightmare. Before long, they arrived before a large creepy door. As Iruma opened it, weapons launched at him from a trap, but he rolled and dodged all of them, impressing the students with his skill. Asmodeus demanded to know why they set the traps, so a student told him that they intended to test the abilities of their newly joined companions. At that moment, Iruma realized that the Misfit class was a class full of nutcases. Before he knew it, a giant dude appeared before his eyes, saying that he had allowed himself to be impaled by all the weapons. He introduced himself as Sabnok, and said that he intends to become the new Demon King, and to rank highest on the scoreboard. As Caligo entered the class, he blocked off the weapons with his shield. He told them that he was assigned as their new teacher, and commanded them to head outside for a test to determine their ranks. When they arrived in a valley, he told them that their task was to retrieve the flag on a faraway hug. When Sabnok told him that he would follow the Cutthroat Valley because it was a shorter route, Caligo told him that the Guardian of the Valley was being overprotective, and would annihilate him immediately. When they were ready to take off, the demons drew their wings and flew away, blowing Iruma towards the edge of the cliff, and the instructor pushed him off to his doom. As Asmodeus flew through the valley, weird flowers launched needles at him, but he managed to evade them, and summoned his dragon to burn them all. When it was done, Clara appeared behind him, saying that she wishes to hop a free ride on his back. Before they knew it, they got tangled up, and fell towards the ground. At the same time, Sabnok tried forcing his way through the Cutthroat Valley, determined to win through this shortcut, and was convinced that he needed to prove himself so that he would become the new Demon King. Luckily, he managed to climb up a mountain before flying away. In the meantime, Iruma was being carried off by a demon crow. After he fell off the cliff, he was caught by the crow that was taking him home for dinner. However, after hearing a loud cry, it abandoned him and immediately took off. Meanwhile, Clara was being swallowed up by a giant flower, but Asmodeus cut it open and freed her. With Iruma nowhere in sight, he began to wonder how they would find him, and thought that he may have made it across the valley already. Iruma had fallen into a bird's nest. As he thought his end was near, he discovered that the bird was wounded. Hoping to treat its wound, he decided to slit himself, and rolled a bandage over his hand as a demonstration to the beast. However, when he tried to open his bandage, a drop fell into the bird's wound, healing it in an instant. Excited by its recovery, it threw Iruma on its back and flew off with him. At the same time, Sabnok was finally getting his butt kicked by the Guardian of the Valley, and he realized that he was about to meet his end before becoming the Demon King. Determined to fight back, he bit his dog tag and summoned a weapon out of his lightning. Eager to survive, he charged at the giant bird, remembering his childhood desire of becoming the king. Before striking the monster, with the beast unscathed, he bit another dog tag and summoned a new weapon before flying at the monster, but it remained unharmed from all his attacks. Even still, it knocked his blade into the air and cast him towards the edge of the cliff. However, Sabnok remained determined to prove himself and screamed at the beast for being an ugly, disgusting monster. As it was ready to end him, Iruma appeared before his eyes and managed to save him from his doom. Before long, they realized that the birds were a family. Iruma began telling the monster that he treated her baby and said that they would be leaving soon. Sabnok thought that this was his perfect opportunity to slay the Guardian and immediately raised his blade, but Iruma told him to surrender before they were served as dinner, so they raised their arms in surrender. On the other hand, Asmodeus and Clara finally arrived at the Hugh, and they realized that Aruna was nowhere in sight. With all the students having made it to the Hugh, Caligo decided to cancel Iruma and Sabnok from the test, but a powerful wind blew at them, and the Guardian began flying towards them. Afraid that it intends to attack them, Caligo prepared to end the bird, but Iruma started waving at them from on top of it. However, after they arrived, Caligo decided to punish them for returning late. He told the students that they would be ranked by a rank owl, and said that their ranks would determine their success in school. When Sabnok remembered that Iruma had rescued him from getting isekai'd, he thanked him for his support, and told him that he would consider him his rival for the demon throne. Before long, all the students received their ranking bandage. When it was Iruma's turn, he began pondering his future in the demon world. Before he could choose a badge, the bird flew away, but everyone realized that he was wearing a mystical ring. Sabnok remembered that his brother told him the new Demon King would descend from a foreign realm and would make peace with all the monsters in the demon realm with the mystical golden ring, and thought that Iruma would become the next Demon King. Iruma tried to take off the ring, but realized that it was stuck to his finger, and all the students avoided him when he tried asking for their help. When he discovered that there was a demon behind him, he tried getting it off, but the demon began screaming a noise that brought terrible pain on everyone. Looking to eliminate it, Sabnok suggested that they pull it out of the ring, but with a touch, he passed out immediately. When Asmodeus tried suggesting a new plan, it bit his nose, causing him to pass out instantly. Caligo thought the monster was too dangerous and tried slicing off Iruma's arm, but Sullivan stopped him just in time. When the monster tried screaming once more, Sullivan silenced it, making it return into the ring. He told Iruma that the ring was a gluttonous feeder ring that devours the powers of a demon when it was hungry, and said that the only way to keep it satisfied was by feeding it with more power. By the following day, Iruma discovered that he was ranked the lowest on the scoreboard since he could not retrieve a badge from the rank owl, but was glad that everyone would ignore his ugly ass because of his poor performance. However, the next morning, Sullivan decided to drop him off in a carriage and laid a red carpet in his honor, making him realize that it was impossible to go unnoticed. Inside the class, Iruma began wondering how he could return to the human world before his secret was discovered, but his friends appeared before him. As he watched Asmodeus and Clara play together, he thought that he was lucky having them as his friends. Inside a new class, the teacher introduced herself as Susie and said that she would be teaching them how to make flowers using magic. As a demonstration, she cast a spell on a plant and it bloomed into a flower. When the students realized that a few seniors were watching them, Sabnok decided to utilize the attention and cast his own spell, but his plant turned into a monster flower. Looking to challenge him, Asmodeus decided to reveal his own burning flower, but Sabnok doused it with water. Angered by this act, Asmodeus tried blasting him with a flame, but the teacher cast large vines to separate them. Before long, all the other students made their flowers blossom. Iruma wondered how he could grow his own plant since he had no magical powers, but wished for a beautiful flower. Looking to try his luck, he cast a little spell, and a blinding light burst forth before him. As a large tree began to rise, it burst out of the tower and appeared as a beautiful cherry blossom. At the sight of this, the student president, Amory, realized that the tree was from the human world, and demanded to meet Iruma immediately. That evening, Iruma offered to clean the schoolyard, hoping to make up for his blunder, so the men led him to the dumpster and told him to get rid of all the trash. However, before he could begin, Asmodeus launched a flame to burn them up. He told him that he had come to offer his support and was willing to stay by his side forever, but Iruma was tired of seeing his useless, horrendous face, so he commanded him to head home. Inside the school, Iruma tried returning his cleaning tools, but bumped into Amory. As he tried to help her, she remembered her favorite comic book, and she realized that he was the human she was looking for, whom she hoped would translate the words in her comic book. However, she thought he was a menace and wondered if he was better off arrested. Afraid his secret would be discovered, Iruma tried freeing himself, but she seized him tightly, convinced that he intended to play a human trick on her. With Iruma nearly wetting himself, he tried apologizing once more, but she imitated him, believing that he intended to cast a spell on her. However, when her book fell to the floor, he snatched it up and discovered that it was a familiar comic book. Realizing he could read it, she began to ask him for the meaning of the words, so he started translating it. Looking to hear more translations, she started dragging him away, but Iruma thought she intended to expose him to everyone. However, she led him into her office and told him to translate all the words inside the book. Iruma thought that reading the book would convince her that he was human, but could never turn down a request, so he began to read it. When he was done, she told him that she would summon him again, and commanded him to obey her immediately. After he left the office, Amory thought it would be safer for the demon world if Iruma was captured, but she desired to have him translate her other comic books. The next day, as Iruma was heading to the school, Opera the butler asked him if he wishes to return to the human world. Iruma remembered that his parents were a piece of worthless trash who never cared about him, and that his human friends were a bunch of disgusting snobs who never noticed his presence. Opera decided to tell him that he could return to the human world by having the highest rank on the school board. He told him that staying in the demon world may become too dangerous, and that he may have to return to the human world eventually. At the cafeteria, Iruma began to remember Opera's words, but thought that it would only draw more attention towards him. After receiving a message from Amory, Iruma told Asmodeus and Clara that he needed to catch some air. At once, they offered to follow him around like hopeless pets, but he told them that their faces were becoming too disgusting to look at. At the same time, Amory was in a council meeting, but was looking to meet Iruma again. After seeing enough of their horrendous faces, she called an end to the meeting and took off immediately. After meeting Iruma in the hallway, she told him that she was eager to hear more of the stories. However, Asmodeus and Clara spotted them, and Asmodeus thought that Iruma was plotting to control the school council and was choosing to keep them out of danger. Meanwhile, in the private office, Iruma began to read Amory the comic book. When he was done, he decided to ask her about her dreams for the future, so she told him that her intentions were to create a better world for the demons, and to make the school the greatest place in their world. She told him that she dreams of working in a flower shop, but would love to become a housewife to an NBA star so that she can play with his basketballs every night. She decided to ask him for his own ambitions, but Iruma was a total moron, and told her that his ambition was to play with his friends forever. She told him that his ambitions were as useless as his hideous face, and asked him for his true aspirations. Iruma told her that he doesn't have any aspirations, because he had dedicated his whole life towards serving other people. Amory told him to consider his ranking a new ambition, and to increase his rank to the highest position. As she said those words, the door exploded, and Clara appeared in the smoke, demanding to play with Iruma. Amory was happy that their conversation was not overheard, but decided to tell Iruma that if he managed to increase his rank, she would be waiting to reward him with a night of plot development. The following day inside the hall, Iruma decided to tell Asmodeus that he intends to climb up the ranks, because he was inspired by Amory's promise of plot development. Excited by his words, Asmodeus suggested that Iruma rises to the highest rank and becomes the new Demon King. But Iruma told him that he has no desire to become the king, but to merely increase his rank to a higher level. Asmodeus thought that Iruma has a superior intention, and decided to heed his words. Before long, they arrived at a training ground, so Asmodeus told him that his best chance at increasing his ranks was by having great scores at their next promotion exam. He said that the exams would test their abilities with a cannonball, and showed him a ball, saying that their duty was to avoid getting hit by it. By the time the game began, Iruma realized that this was f***ing dodgeball. At that moment, Sabnok and the other students decided to join the game. As Sabnok launched the ball, a student slashed it in half, and two others parried it with their shield. At the sight of this, Iruma realized that he could not survive this dodgeball, since he has no powers to protect himself with. He was afraid of disappointing Amory, and thought it was impossible to increase his rank. Realizing he was hopeless, Asmodeus suggested that he requests for Sullivan's help. After arriving home, Iruma asked Sullivan to teach him how to play dodgeball. So when they arrived outside, Sullivan told him to throw the ball at the rock before him, but Iruma thought he was too weak to hit the target. However, when he tried throwing the ball, Sullivan told him to repeat a unique spell. As he said the spell, his ring began to sparkle, and a dragon launched at the rock before him, destroying it and taking off towards the sky. Shocked by the sight of this, Iruma told Sullivan that he has no intentions of maiming his opponents, and suggested that they try a gentler approach without magic. Sullivan told him that it would be difficult to defeat his opponents without using his magic, but decided to release a protective spell into his hands. He told him that he would assign Opera to become his new trainer, so he wouldn't flop during the exam. Before long, Opera arrived with a set of balls and started throwing them at Iruma like a mindless robot, but he managed to dodge everything. After growing exhausted, Opera told him that he could not win the game by merely dodging the balls, but said that he needed to catch them for his opponents to lose. However, when Iruma dodged another round of balls, Opera told him that he was hopeless and that was why his parents had abandoned him. The next day, as they began another round of training, Opera threw a ball that stopped before Iruma's eyes, and told him to start catching them before they hit his face. However, when he began to throw them, Iruma evaded them again, but nearly caught the third, managing to impress Clara and Asmodeus. Hoping to develop tougher muscles, Iruma began exercising like he was preparing for the Hong Kong Marathon. When the day's training was over, he began to devour a bunch of meals like a glutton. A few days later, as they trained again, Iruma began to evade another set of balls. He intended to catch them, but was too afraid to even make an attempt. Luckily, he managed to catch one, and was delighted like he had won the lottery. In the evening, he slept at a tree, having grown exhausted from all his training. So Clara and Asmodeus slept beside him, because their parents were too broke to buy them a bed. The following morning, while having breakfast, Iruma told Opera that he was afraid that he may fail his exam and lose his place inside the school. Hoping to cheer him up, Opera told him to be brave, and said that being afraid of his opponents was the surest way to lose. At school, with the students ready for the exam, Caligo decided to explain the game to them. As he showed them a magical board, he told them he would be separating them into two teams, and said that the only way to win was by striking their opponents with the ball until no one was left standing. As he began sharing the armbands for their separate teams, Iruma and Asmodeus realized that they had been drawn into opposing teams. Angered by this discovery, Asmodeus demanded to know why they were separated, so Caligo told him that it was the only way to balance both teams. Afraid of seeing Iruma lose, Asmodeus thought of supporting him from his own team. With the game ready to begin, the first team thought of eliminating Sabnok, taking him for an easy pick. But the ball was snatched away before they knew it. With Sabnok in control of the ball, the opposing team thought they were toast. Afraid for herself, a girl cast ice crystals before her, but the force of the ball broke through her shield and smacked her head, causing her to be ruled out. Clara started drawing several balls, and everyone began to wonder which was the real ball. Looking to have an advantage, one student decided to destroy the ground. Luckily, Iruma spotted the ball and managed to catch it, but the ground destroyer was kicked out of the game. However, when Iruma was ready to throw the ball, he realized that he could not aim it, as it was never part of his training. So Sabnok offered to teach him. With Asmodeus still considering his decision to help Iruma, Sabnok thought he would be an easy target, so he threw the ball at him. However, he merely caught it and struck him instantly. Looking to utilize his distraction, Clara tried to hit him, but he struck her instead. Within a moment, all the students were kicked out of the game, and Iruma and Asmodeus realized that they were the last of their teams. After noticing Iruma's determination to win, Asmodeus realized that he was unwilling to give up his spot on the scoreboard. As his determination grew, flames erupted around him, and he thought of vanquishing Iruma in an instant. At the same time, Amory arrived inside the cave, and was hoping to see Iruma win the exam. With Asmodeus ready to end him, Iruma remembered Opera's words, and decided to be brave, so he began running towards him. With a rage, Asmodeus flung the flaming ball, and it pushed Iruma back the way he came, scorching his hands like a fireball. However, he managed to swirl the flame, and rising high, he planted Asmodeus with the fireball, shocking everyone with his maneuver. With this victory, the team gathered around him and began celebrating their success. For his performance, Caligo decided to increase his ranking, and everyone thought Iruma would certainly become the Demon King. As Amory appeared before him, she congratulated him for his success and said that he was becoming a better version of himself. Iruma told her that he had never desired anything for himself, but was happy that he achieved his first ambition. That evening at his home, Iruma announced his victory at the game, and Opera was delighted with his success. As he laid in bed that night, he began to wonder if he would really become the Demon King, and thought his secret would eventually be exposed to everyone. The following day in class, a new teacher arrived, introducing himself as Robin, and told them that he would be teaching them to command their summoned beasts. In the courtyard, the teacher told them that their beast was basically their partner, and that they needed to bond together so that they would become suitable partners. At his command, Asmodeus decided to summon his own dragon, and the teacher was impressed by the sight of it. Taking it for a challenge, Sabnok decided to summon his own dragon, and the teacher thought their dragons were the most powerful beasts he had ever seen. However, when it was Iruma's turn, he grew afraid, since Caligo had warned him to never summon him. The teacher told him that the master should never be afraid of his beast, and commanded him to cast his summoning spell immediately. At that instant, Caligo appeared before their eyes. Realizing he had been summoned, he thought of annihilating Iruma, but the teacher caught him, and thought he looked fluffy like a pillow. As Caligo grew angry, he thought of annihilating the teacher, but was punished for failing to listen to his master. When he told Iruma to undo the spell, the teacher told them that they could only reverse the spell after the lesson was over. With both of them alone, Caligo told Iruma that he would stay with him until the lesson was over, and demanded that he gets the highest score. He told him that every summoned beast takes the form of its master, and said that he had taken this ugly shape because Iruma was the ugliest loser in the world. The teacher summoned them for a game to build each other's trust, but Caligo threatened to annihilate Iruma for coming too close. However, when the teacher threatened to reduce their score, Caligo decided to agree. As they played fetch, all the students gathered around to watch their teacher in action, as Caligo retrieved the item. Afterwards, they began a series of games to build each other's trust. By the time it was over, Iruma apologized for summoning him unnoticed, but Caligo decided to ask why Iruma had not called upon him in the valley when the guardian bird tried to end them. So Iruma told him that he was unwilling to see him wounded by the guardian. As he let out those words, they realized that Asmodeus and Sabnok intended to duel, so that they would discover the stronger beast. However, before their beasts could begin devouring one another, Caligo cast them to the ground, shocking everyone with his ability. With the conflict settled, Caligo decided to ask the teacher why the game for bonding with their summoned beast was important. The teacher tried saying that it was the only way to strengthen their connection, but Caligo told him that their bonding was to save both of their lives from a threat. He said that summoned beasts were magical animals that could turn on anyone at any moment, and said that they ought to be respected as they could create chaos in the demon world. Having said this, the students began treating their beasts like royalty. Inside the cafeteria, Asmodeus told Iruma that a group of seniors would be arriving to persuade freshers into joining their groups, and said that they often help the students in increasing their rank. Hearing his words, Iruma realized that he could increase his rank in a short while, and thought of finding himself a group. Before he knew it, several demons rushed into the school, hoping to find some freshers they can persuade into joining their group. One demon tried approaching Iruma, but Asmodeus cast a flame to chase him away. When a few other demons tried hurrying to them, Asmodeus cast a flaming barrier around them. As they walked down the hallway, they discovered the seniors trying to force the freshers into their groups. After discovering that the student president was approaching them, Iruma became afraid, having failed to realize that she was Amory. As she appeared before him, she decided to give him a flyer, saying that she was inviting him to join her group, and immediately left. Inside the class, Caligo told the students to join a particular group of seniors, saying that it was their best hope of increasing their rank. Excited by the thought of it, Asmodeus suggested that they scout for a group. Inside the group tower, they came across a few of their friends. One of them asked Iruma what group he intends to join, since he was the most overpowered student around them. Iruma tried telling him that he had not found the right group, but his ring began to glow. Before he knew it, it started pulling him down the hallway like a nail to a magnet, and he bumped into a new demon. Afraid that the demon may have lost consciousness, Iruma thought of calling for help. However, he managed to wake up. After spotting Iruma's ring, he told him that the ring was drawn to his collar, as they possessed similar powers. He told him that he made his own collar for himself, so that he can use his own magic, and said that he intends to create more of it for the demons who have little magical powers like him. Iruma was enchanted by his words, and thought that he was the coolest demon he had ever met. That night at home, Sullivan decided to tune Iruma's ring so that it would not go out of control anymore. When he was done, he told Iruma to repeat a spell. However, Iruma was afraid that a dragon would be summoned and was unwilling to destroy the home. But Sullivan told him that the spell was a safe one. As he said the spell, a purple flame appeared before his eyes. Sullivan told him that he could increase the power of the flame by adjusting the ring to a higher mode, and a brighter flame began to burn before unleashing into a monstrous fire. Sullivan decided to tell him another powerful spell, and warned him to only use it when he was in great danger, saying that it unleashes all the powers inside the ring at once. The following day at school, a senior decided to challenge Iruma to a shot with the ball, asking to have a taste of his powers since he managed to defeat Asmodeus at dodgeball. Having nothing else to do, Iruma accepted the challenge. As he adjusted his ring, he launched the ball with a spell, but the senior caught it comfortably. He told him that his throw was as weak as his ugly face, and that was why he was dumped by his crush.
Emotional damage!
As Iruma began walking through the school, he wondered what the students would think of him if they realized that his magical powers were from Sullivan, and was convinced that he would lose his relevance in the demon world. Suddenly, he was startled by an explosion, and slipped when he tried to discover what was responsible for it. As the dust cleared, he realized that the earlier student had caused the explosion. While resting from his injuries, he told Iruma that his name was Kiriwo, and said that he was the only member of his group since no one was willing to befriend a lonely, disgusting loser. Iruma decided to look around the lab, and thought the place looked like a haunted house. Kiriwo told him that he can create apparatuses that can be powered by magic. To make a demonstration, he decided to cast a spell into a ball, but nearly passed out from exhaustion. While resting, he told Iruma that he was a weak demon who was born with little magical powers, and could not stop blowing up the lab every time he tried developing a new technology. As he showed Iruma his special apparatus, he told him that the device was created to enhance a demon's magic. However, he considered it useless since he could not fix the missing piece. Ready to take on the challenge, Iruma began to fix the heart. When he was done, Kiriwo decided to put it into the apparatus. As it powered up, a bright light began to glow before them, so Kiriwo told him that the machine would help in increasing their powers through its magical ball. With this apparatus, he thought that the weaker demons would become as powerful as the greater ones, and that it would create equality in the demon world. Inspired by his words, Iruma decided to join his group. The following day, when Iruma returned to the lab, he told Kiriwo that Asmodeus and Clara were eager to become the newest members, because other groups thought they were too ugly to be accepted. Meanwhile in the office, Amory was angry that Iruma had failed to appear at the school council during the trial period of the groups. However, when he finally arrived, he realized that the room's decoration was in the same style as in the comic book. As they sat down for tea, she asked him if he had joined a senior group, so he told her that he found the perfect one for himself. However, she grew angry at his words, and demanded that he joins her own group so that she could finally taste his meat. The following day in class, as the students prepared for their parents' day, Iruma remembered that his useless parents never visited him at school for once, and began to wonder if he would also be abandoned in the demon world. Inside the lab, Iruma decided to ask Kiriwo if his parents had appeared on his own parents' day. Kiriwo told him that his parents had kicked him out several years ago, since he has little magical powers, and said that his brother has watched over him ever since. Iruma thought they were similar since they were both abandoned by their parents, and hoped to form a greater bond with him. That evening, when they arrived at the courtyard, they realized that they had only a narrow space to showcase their group presentation. Kiriwo told them that he has a low rank, and said that the space could only be larger if he had a higher rank. Realizing that Kiriwo was a worthless loser, Iruma decided to ask what he had showcased in the previous year. Kiriwo told him that he had merely shown everyone his apparatus, and thought that they would be impressed by the sight of it, but they had called it a worthless piece of junk, just like his future.
Damn!
To impress everyone, Iruma suggested that they launch fireworks, but the demons had never seen any before. However, they agreed to give it a try, so Kiriwo suggested that they spend the entire night creating the fireworks. That night, after another explosive experiment, Iruma began to wonder how Kiriwo was not already isekai'd from all his failed experiments. Kiriwo showed them his invisible shield, and said that it often protected him from injuries. However, he was uncertain that he could create the fireworks since he had never seen any before. At these words, Iruma realized that he needs to show them the fireworks, so the next day, he decided to visit Amory and asked to see her beautiful fireworks. She thought he intended to have a quick one, and told him that she was ready to unleash her fireworks at once, but he told her that he wishes to take home all of her fireworks because he would not be satisfied from a single climax. As she grew angry that he was becoming picky, she told him that her fireworks were very special, and that he could be eliminated if caught in the act. Iruma promised that he would be gentle, and said that he would only climax a few times before stopping. Realizing she would also climax from watching him climax, she agreed to offer him her fireworks for one night only. At the lab, Iruma decided to reveal the real fireworks to his friends, and they were excited by the sight of it. Before long, they began to create their own fireworks. By the time they were done, they decided to try a little test outside. As Asmodeus lit up the cannon, a small firework dispersed into the air. Delighted with their success, Iruma suggested that they create greater fireworks. The next day at the courtyard, Asmodeus told Iruma that the cannon has been perfected for the fireworks, and that he was eager to unleash them across the demon world. Two students began teasing them, saying that they had created a new garbage disposal, but Asmodeus told them that their mom was garbage. Meanwhile, Kariwo entered an attic, intending to destroy the school during the festivities. As he unveiled his secret weapon, he realized that he would soon be transporting everyone into the afterlife. Iruma mysteriously appeared behind him, and wondered what he was secretly doing. Shocked by his presence, Kariwo decided to ask how he had discovered his whereabouts. Iruma told him that his ring had led him into the storeroom, and Kariwo remembered that it had happened before in the hallway. Iruma wondered what he was doing in the attic, so Kariwo told him that this was his secret base, and decided to invite him inside. He told him that the attic used to be a secret hideout for demons who often experimented on hidden devices. Iruma wondered if he was equally experimenting on a hidden device, but Kariwo unveiled the window, and told him that he was merely taking in the sight. He reminded Iruma about his desire to create a world without magical powers, and said that he was eager to see it become a reality. With Iruma delighted by his words, Kariwo began telling him that he was happy to have known him, and said that he was different from the other students he had met. Iruma told him that he was also happy to have met him, and thought that he may someday reveal his secret of being human. Kariwo told him that he came to the attic to have some alone time, but was now eager to see the fireworks launched into the sky. As Iruma grew excited, he suggested that they enter the festival's competition and win the grand prize before everyone. He was certain that they could win it, and told Kariwo that they would be respected across the school, and would increase their ranks at the same time. Excited by the possibility, Kariwo decided to agree, but told him to never tell anyone that he has a secret hideout. The following day, Iruma decided to ask for Sullivan's whereabouts, having noticed that he had been missing for a few days. So Opera told him that Sullivan had vanished after a meeting with other demon lords, but was certain that he would return to them. At school, as the students were preparing for the start of their grand festivities, Asmodeus decided to reveal his plans for igniting the fireworks. However, when he summoned a flame to aid his demonstration, Clara decided to set off the fireworks. At this realization, Iruma tried putting out the fire but failed, so Asmodeus protected them immediately. However, it merely lit a flame, and they realized that the cannon was actually empty. Before long, they started looking for Kariwo, convinced that the shell was in his possession, but realized that he was nowhere in sight. As they began to wonder where he was, Asmodeus told them that he may have run off since he was a useless coward anyway. Meanwhile, Kariwo had arrived inside the attic with the shell for the fireworks, and was ready to destroy the entire school. As it grew dark, he decided to crush his neck collar. At that instant, the ground began to quake, and a glass shield descended on the school. Inside the school, Iruma tried reuniting with his friends, but bumped into an invisible shield. As they touched the glass before them, they realized that they were all trapped inside invisible walls. Iruma remembered that Kariwo had revealed a similar shield to them, and wondered if he had cast the barriers. Hoping to destroy it, Asmodeus struck it with his flaming sword, but it was unscathed. Asmodeus told them that Kariwo had been plotting for this day a long time ago, and had intentionally ditched them before setting off his plans. Iruma told them that he knows his whereabouts, and intends to find him immediately. Asmodeus offered to help him through the barriers, and began to draw the blueprint of the school. Eager to help, Clara decided to summon paper soldiers, so Asmodeus cast a flame on them, and directed them down the hallway. He said that he would find the location of the barriers using the papers, and would guide Iruma through this shield. So he began running off. At the same time, Caligo and Robin were trapped inside a shield. Looking to destroy it, Caligo decided to cast a powerful spell that turned into a dragon and broke through the shield. However, it began to seal up again. Caligo thought that an enemy was within the school and realized that they intend to attack the students since Sullivan was absent from the school. Determined to discover who it was, he decided to unleash another spell at the barrier and walked through the opening. Before long, he arrived inside the records office, saying that he intends to check for the student who has the magical powers to cast a barrier. In the meantime, Kariwo realized that the students were being led into the inner courtyard, so he summoned his virtual blueprint, hoping to guide everyone to their doom. With a snap, his monstrous weapon descended before him, so he cast the ball into the machine and powered it, ready to annihilate everyone in an instant. However, he soon discovered that Iruma was heading towards his hideout, and wondered how he managed to discover that he had cast the barrier. Arriving at the attic, Iruma decided to push the hidden stone, revealing the door. But when he tried to enter, he discovered that the entrance was protected by a barrier, so he began pounding on it until he fell inside. Kariwo appeared before his eyes, and told him that he had caused the barrier to appear around the school. As he led him into an inner room, Iruma was frightened by the sight of Kariwo's weapon. He asked him what he intends to do with it, so he told him that he was looking to blow everyone to smithereens. Iruma was confused by his words, and wondered why he had to eliminate everyone, so Kariwo decided to tell him his childhood story. When he was young, his family had discovered that he had very little magical powers, and had thought he was a shame and embarrassment to the family, so they condemned him to the Garden of Delinquents. This garden was a correctional school for abandoned children, but all the kids had teased him, saying that he was uglier than trash. However, he managed to befriend a young girl and impressed her with his invisible shield. But one day, a group of bullies seized her magical earring, and the leader threw it towards the river. Luckily, Kariwo managed to save it with his invisible glass, but exhausted all his powers, so it fell into the water. His crush had lost her mind at the sight of this, and had soon left the garden, never to be seen again. Kariwo told Iruma that he could not forgive himself for losing his crush, and was willing to isekai himself and everyone just to see her again. He forced Iruma to the floor, and told him that his true desire was to eliminate everyone in the demon world. Hearing his words, Iruma thought that he had lost his mind, and realized that he needed to end him immediately. As Kariwo released him, he decided to tell him why he intends to obliterate the school. Several years ago, after he was abandoned by his family, he had tried joining a local gang. They thought he was a messed up kid, and tried kicking him out, but their leader appeared before his eyes. He told him that he was a special kid who had the desire to do the right thing, and said that the demon world had been far too peaceful, and thought that they needed to start a war again. Ever since, they had begun plotting the war, and he had decided to enroll at the school in the meantime. Until one day, the leader had told him that he desires to destroy all the demon leaders, so that the surviving demons would break into an all-out war for power. Kariwo told Iruma that he had put explosives into the fireworks shell, and was looking to see the courtyard explode into a giant flaming mushroom. With Iruma shaken by his confession, Kariwo began telling him that he had allowed him into the attic because he wished to share the sight with him, hoping that he would become sad and depressed. However, Iruma merely looked at him like he was a random dude from the next block, and began stacking up some crates. Shocked by his attitude, Kariwo wondered why he was not quivering in fear. Iruma told him that he was used to feeling despaired, but had managed to learn that no feeling could take away his sadness unless he fought his own way out of it. As he climbed on the crates, he managed to pull the fireworks shell, saying that he would no longer continue to be a coward. With the explosives about to erupt, Iruma flew out of the window and threw it far off with a level 1 spell. However, when his dragon could not break out of the barrier, Iruma decided to use his most powerful spell. With the full power of his ring, he was able to unleash a mightier dragon to combine into a great beast that finally destroyed the barrier. As it rose towards the sky, it exploded into beautiful fireworks that left the students in awe. However, burning rocks began falling from the explosion, aiming to obliterate the school. Luckily, Sullivan appeared just in time, and froze them in that instant before swirling them in a circle, and dispelling them outside the school into an eruption of another cool fireworks. With the threat vanquished, Sullivan and the committee burst into the attic, ready to eliminate Kariwo in an instant. Sullivan decided to ask him if he has an accomplice for his crime, but he told him that he was the only culprit, and that he had always dreamed of seeing the world burn to ash. After hearing his confession, they decided to lead him off to a prison where he can rot forever. By the time Iruma woke up, he discovered that Sullivan was standing before him, and began to wonder if the world was successfully saved. Sullivan told him that the world was at peace, and said that Kariwo had been arrested by the Demon Border Control. Having said this, he carried Iruma off to the window, and he realized that the students had all been waiting to see him. At once, they began screaming his name like a local hero, because their fathers were all nameless douchebags. A few days later, when Iruma tried heading to class, a mysterious man appeared behind him and commanded to speak with him in secret. At the courtyard, the man began telling him that he was willing to help him return to the human world before his secret was discovered, and said that his presence could start a war in this world. He told him that it was the best way to protect him, and said that his memories of the demon world would be erased. However, Amri hurried to him at that moment, and Iruma was shocked to discover that they were family. As she introduced her father as the leader of the Demon Border Patrol, she told him that Iruma was a special kid whose warm hands takes her deep into a plotful paradise. She told him that she wishes to always have his hands close to her, so that she can climax a few times before coming home. Her father thought her words made perfect sense, so he agreed to allow Iruma remain in the demon world, and to keep riding her into a climactic paradise. The following morning, as Iruma was having breakfast, Sullivan told him that his ring was starting to get hungry, and that it needed to be fed with new powers. Having said these words, he cast new magic inside, telling Iruma that his power has now been restored. As Iruma joined his band of losers, Asmodeus told him that he wants to make him his new idol, and decided to imitate his rip-off Harry Styles haircut as a show of his dedication. But Iruma thought he was a disgusting, creepy, horrendous loser, and told him to get his face out of his sight. After getting clapped, Asmodeus tried restoring a little dignity to himself, and offered to carry Iruma's bag to class. But Iruma told him that his face was too ugly to even serve as his busboy. At the same time, Clara was trying to take his place as the new busboy. As she begged him with his magic word, his heart melted in that instant, so he allowed her to have the honor of being his busboy for the day. But she celebrated like she won a lottery. Inside the class, Caligo began telling the students that they would soon be having an end of terminus test. And because he thought that they were all a bunch of morons, he told them that he was rooting for their failure, since his low-paying teaching job was hardly enough to get by. And he thought that with a termination for being a bad teacher, he would fill in for a position as the Demon Lord's assistant. Inside a new class, the teacher began explaining transformation magic to the students, and told them to cast a spell on the frog to change its looks. Deciding to start with the ugliest loser of them all, she decided to summon Iruma to make the first attempt. As he stood before them, he realized that his lying ass face was about to be exposed. However, he managed to crank the ring, and cast a spell that dyed the frog black, and his friends began cheering for his ugly cheating ass. After the class, Iruma and his friends began to head for the cafeteria. When Asmodeus asked him what he would like to have for lunch, Iruma told him that the only thing he wants was for him to get his ugly, disgusting face out of his way, because the sight of him was starting to make him lose appetite. At that moment, the demon appeared out of his ring, and Iruma remembered that it had sucked everyone's powers the last time it was hungry. Afraid it may devour his hand, Iruma tried shaking it off, but he was stuck to him like glue. As he tried running off to Sullivan, the demon told him that it was actually not hungry, but Iruma was shocked to discover that it could even speak. Before he knew it, even the demon began to freak out. When a few girls noticed Iruma talking to himself, one girl wondered if he was the new school weirdo, but he ran off immediately. As he sat in a quiet room, the demon told him that it was an incarnation of the ring, but could not explain why it could speak in plain Japanese. It told Iruma that it could now process its own thoughts and feelings, and began screaming at him for being an ugly, horrendous loser who could not even use his own magical ring properly. It said that Iruma has lost all his brain cells for making him use up all of Sullivan's powers when he tried to save the school from Kariwo's attack. Tired of its moronic master, the demon told him that it would withhold its powers henceforth, and expose his losing, cheating, disgusting ass to everyone. Desperate to keep his ass safe, Iruma asked the demon for useful tips in controlling its magic, so it began telling him that the best way to harness his full powers was by having a strong desire to utilize these powers, and that through a powerful imagination, he could become the most overpowered human in the world. To put its suggestion into practice, it told Iruma to cast a transformation spell and make him Prince Charming, so that it can get all the girls he wants. Mustering some courage and poor imaginations, Iruma cast a spell on it, turning it into a one-eyed ugly freak. With the spell failing to make him Prince Charming, the demon told him that he was as hopeless as his ugly ass face, and was better off quitting school for an ordinary farming job on an abandoned island. Having said this, it decided to name itself Alacrid, after Iruma's ugly moronic face. Meanwhile, Amory was wondering if the ugly kid she met at a midnight concert was Iruma, but began to think that her dream man would have no time for a moronic concert. But at the same time, her moronic crush was trying to prove himself once more, so he decided to cast a transformation spell on himself, but only managed to change the color of his uniform. Alacrid told him that he lacks quality imaginations and suggested that he tries a fashionable outfit instead. So Iruma put on his thinking cap, and for all his imaginations, he managed to cast a spell that drew Amory's attention, and she caught him in a lady's dress. Horrified by the realization that her crush was an ugly, worthless cross-dresser, she began to freak out like she had seen a ghost from Chinatown. When Iruma tried explaining that his ring had told him to change into a cool outfit, Amory screamed at him for being a disgusting f***ing weirdo and immediately ran off. As Iruma began heading home, he wondered how he would explain to his crush that he was practicing some transformation magic. He thought his luck was over and that she would puke at the sight of his disgusting face. At that moment, Alacrid re-emerged from the ring and began to laugh at his moronic face. Desperate to regain his trust, Iruma asked Alacrid to reveal himself to her, but he told him that he was afraid of exposing himself to anyone. However, Iruma was afraid that Amory would consider him a perv for the rest of her life, so he begged Alacrid to reveal himself to her. Hoping to discover why Alacrid was able to talk, Iruma decided to meet Sullivan at his office. However, Sullivan told him that it was impossible for the ring to speak, because it was created as a magical apparatus whose only purpose was to store power. When Iruma began to insist that his ring really could speak, Sullivan told him that he was losing his f***ing mind, and Opera arrived to lead him off to his room. He thought that he needed some sleep for a brain reset, and decided to sing him lullaby until he fell asleep. The following day, Iruma began to search for clues in the library, hoping to discover how the ring was able to speak. However, he soon realized that Alacrid had no memories from the past, and had only begun to gain consciousness after bumping into Kiriwo in the hallway. At that moment, Iruma realized that Alacrid had gained full consciousness only after his rank was increased. Before long, he hurried outside the school, and was delighted to have figured out the reason why Alacrid could speak. With his rank deciding Alacrid's growth, Iruma told him that he would begin increasing his rank to the top level, so that he would continue evolving. But Alacrid told him that the attention would only remind everyone about his ugly ass face. At this realization, Iruma decided to remain in his current rank and to avoid drawing any attention to himself. The following day, Amory began to remember her favorite romantic comic that Iruma always read to her. Afraid of losing her crush, she began to wonder why Iruma was dressed like a filthy, disgusting perv, and nearly lost her mind from all the shit she was thinking. When a member of her team tried telling her about an upcoming meeting, she thought he was heading down the same disgusting, filthy path like Iruma, and began screaming at him until he returned to his senses. But the dude had already wet his underwear. To cool her head off, Amory decided to leave the office, but continued to remember her crush dressed like an ugly perv. However, she began to wonder why she was starting to fall in love with him, since his hands were no longer enough to make her climax. She thought it was because he's human, but at once realized that he was an incredible person, even with an ugly ass face that looked like shit. Hoping to discover the truth, she thought of seeing him, and asked why he had chosen to be a disgusting perv like his face was not enough. Meanwhile, a girl was trying to wear Iruma in some girl's clothes to promote her dead musical career like her weird ass face. When Iruma told her that he was unwilling to violate himself, she told him that she intends to use his face to promote her music across the netherworld. At that instant, she tried wearing the dress, but he knocked her to the ground and nearly fell on top of her. But at once, he noticed Amory in front of him, and thought he was officially screwed. As Amory realized that her crush was nothing more than a worthless, rotten, sick-ass loser, she threatened to isekai him into another world and began dragging him away. Inside her office, she began telling him that she has no intentions of judging his disgusting preferences, but was rather hoping to tell him about his magical apparatus group. She told him that since the only senior in their group has been arrested for the crime he tried to commit, the group would be put on a break until they found a senior to take charge of the duty. However, in the meantime, she told him that all members of his group would be placed in other groups until they received a letter of recommendation from their separate presidents. And so, she had decided to condemn Asmodeus in the new magic group so that Iruma could stay far away from his disgusting crybaby face. As for Clara, she had left her in the game group because she was far too moronic for any other group. When Iruma wondered what group he would belong in, she stamped her foot before him and told him that she had drafted him to be in the student council. Before he knew it, she revealed him to all the students, and Iruma realized that his plans of becoming invincible was dead and buried already. The following morning, Iruma woke up to a speed-run morning routine, and wondered if he was in the barracks. By the time they arrived at Amory's office, she began screaming at them for looking so worthless and useless, and Iruma spent the rest of his day carrying papers across the office and running from monsters like the sport from hell. The following morning, they began welcoming the students, and Iruma nearly climaxed from screaming so hard. When it was time for lunch, Iruma found a tiny piece of food in his plate. Amory began telling them that the Red Moon Week had begun, and that all true demons needed to eat as minimal food as possible so that they would appreciate their sustaining belly. Being a sucker for food, Iruma began to cry for himself, having expected to eat all the best meals in the cafeteria, but a senior told him to sit up straight. Realizing he was a weak-ass loser, Amory began telling him that every member of the council was meant to serve as an example for all the students. As she let out those words, she jumped high and smacked a demon on the head, telling her members that he was in an evil cycle. Iruma remembered that Asmodeus had once told him that demons become evil when they reach their stress period, and were often tied up until the cycle was over. As Iruma watched Amory leave, he realized that he was totally in love with this bad With Iruma having been away from home, Sullivan decided to bring him a cart full of gifts, but Amory slammed the door at his worthless face. When he tried looking inside, she told him to get his fat face away from her sight. Finally alone with Iruma, she told him to undress, but he was afraid of revealing his peewee millimeter because it was smaller than a baby's pinky finger. So Amory told him that she only wishes to listen to her usual teen romance in his usual outfit, because he looked like a useless employee in the committee uniform. After he was done reading the comic, she grew excited and thought that her wedding would look like Cinderella in the prince's castle. However, as she tried taking her tea, her cup broke on the floor and she thought it was very strange. A few days later, as they speed ran their morning routine, Iruma ran the like a pro and even finished off his race without getting eaten by the monsters. However, when they sat for lunch, Iruma realized that it was still the same sad and disgusting meal, but decided to eat it anyway. As Amory watched him trying to fit in, the PA system announced that she was being summoned to the prep room, but they thought that the voice was unfamiliar. However, she told them that she was going to check it out and began to leave. As she descended down the steps, she was glad that Iruma was starting to fit in and thought of making him a full-time member of the council. Shortly, she arrived inside the prep room, wondering who had summoned her. After spotting a stranger on the floor, she tried to help him, but he had baited her into this trap and sprayed her face with a mysterious perfume. Inside her office, while the other members were trying to tidy up the place, a student appeared before them, telling them that he had not summoned Amory, but suspected that she was lured into a trap. So at once, they rushed into the prep room, but found her unconscious. As they wondered if she fell sick, she began asking for a cover to protect herself, because the perfume had obviously reset her brain. But somehow, all the boys thought she looked hot, and began climaxing into their underwear. As they started walking down the hallway, all the students discovered that she had become a different person entirely. But Iruma wondered who must have cast a spell on her, and noticed as a man vanished into the darkness. Inside a private room, a teacher began asking Amory about herself, but as she answered all her questions, they realized that the spell had not affected her memory. However, when she decided to apologize for being too violent and for treating her members like soldiers preparing for war, they left their floodgates open, shocked by her words because she never apologized nor felt bad for anything. Caligo began telling the boys that Amory was under a psychological spell and that it would be nearly impossible for anyone to break the spell. The teacher told them that only Amory could break the spell, and said that it could only be possible if she continued doing her regular activities. But as she let out those words, the boys realized that she may be entirely hopeless, as she was closer to becoming a vegetable than to being restored to her right mind. However, they vowed to find the culprit and to execute him for his disgusting crime. Shortly, Caligo began telling them that he would disband the school council if they failed to restore their leader to her right mind. He thought they were useless to the school if they could not get their own shit together, and was unwilling to keep them around as a mere liability. The following day, as Amory resumed her duties, the boys saluted her like their daily routine. However, rather than commanding them for their regular morning workout, she invited them for breakfast like a retired housewife. As they drank all of her juice, they realized that she tastes much better than they imagined. but wondered if she would remain a moron forever. And later that day, as she began stamping her routine letters like a kid handling a pen for the first time, all the boys wondered if she would equally handle their own giant stamp with just as much care, but thought they were entirely hopeless and screwed in their duty. However, that evening, after completing their daily routine, Amory decided to ask them if they were becoming sick of watching her horrendous face slug around the office like a useless deadweight. But they told her that her disgusting face was just what the doctor ordered. Delighted by their words, she decided to leave, but as soon as she left, they fell from exhaustion. Amory had been the most useless leader since she lost her mind, but the council members were afraid that telling her the truth would force her to quit her position and render them entirely useless and jobless. So they agreed to continue doing her duty and to never confess the truth to her. As they returned to the office, they realized that a stranger was inside. When they rushed inside, they found a hideous, worthless loser, Ronov, who was the president of another group. After spotting Amory, he decided to challenge her to a dissolution election, hoping to steal her position as the council president. To prove that he meant business, he decided to show them a ridiculously long list of signatures that he already acquired in his petition. As he drew closer to Amory, he told her that he had awaited this moment for a long time, but was too chicken to challenge her a long time ago. As her retirement option, he decided to offer her a sweet spot in between his man plot. But Iruma smacked him off his crush, making her fall in love in that instant. Realizing he was outnumbered and could easily get his ass kicked, Ronov hurried out of the office. Once he was gone, the council members saluted Iruma for standing up to him until he quivered like a disgusting coward. However, the following day, Ronov began his presidential campaign to draw supporters for himself, but everyone thought he was too ugly for his own good. However, when he promised to cancel school and make every day a holiday, the lazy students began to scream in support. Meanwhile, Amory was trying to campaign for her own position, but was too chicken to even read her own speech, and everyone knew that she had zero chances of winning. One council member, Johnny, told the others that they were clearly at a disadvantage, and at this point, they stood no chances of claiming victory in the election. However, they tried giving her some false hope, and another member offered to bring her a drink so that she would continue repeating her nonsense until everyone passed out from boredom. However, Iruma thought of a new idea, and decided to call Asmodeus and Clara for their support. After the call was over, he thought of summoning Caligo for assistance, but he knew that Caligo would totally destroy him. But at that moment, he freaked out from a mysterious hand on his back, but realized that it was Amory. He wondered why she looked like a cat out of water, so she told him that she wishes to speak with him in private. Inside her office, Iruma began to wonder what she intends to tell him. But at that moment, Alacrid appeared before his eyes, having returned from his hiatus. He began telling him that she was hopelessly in love with him, and suggested that he takes the first step to confess that he loves her too. However, Iruma was too chicken to confess his love, but was delighted to see Alacrid again. Even still, Alacrid thought his face was haunting and horrendous, so he told him to shut his disgusting little work of a mouth, and accused him of dumping him for a new hottie. Realizing he's been caught, Iruma decided to apologize for ditching the bro code, and asked how he could break the spell on Amory. Alacrid began telling him that the spell was nearly broken, but that the magical thread tying up the spell was stuck on something and only a trigger could return her to her senses. As they heard a knock, Alacrid vanished from sight, afraid of being exposed. Before Iruma's eyes, Amory walked into the office, looking like her old self again. With Iruma in disbelief, she tried speaking like her former self, but her horrendous voice gave her away, and he realized that she was still the same weakling. After a moment, he decided to ask her why she tried returning to her old self and if her brain cells had gone on holiday. So she told him that she had thought that restyling her hair like a rock star would return her to her true mind, because she was afraid of losing the election and leaving them useless and jobless. When Iruma tried telling her that she was doing a great job, she told him that she was merely a figurehead and knew that they had all been filling in for her. To confess her true feelings, she told him that she loves the members of the student council because they have shown their loyalty and have stayed by her side without abandoning her. All this had made her afraid of disappointing them at the election, and had inspired her decision to quit her position. She told him that she cares about the school, and having realized that she was but a liability to everyone, she has thought it fitting to quit her position before everyone began to hate her. She said that her new desire was to return to being a regular student, and to start having tea time with Iruma. As she looked him straight in the eyes, she told him that she wants to be with him forever and to follow him around like a leech. However, Iruma was not ready to become a father, so he told her to remember her ambitions and to do whatever makes her happy, except following him around like some mystical spirit. He told her that fulfilling her dreams and ambitions was the only way to true happiness, and that it would always make her special to everyone. After hearing his inspirational speech, she grew excited and promised to give the election her best shot. So they shook hands in a renewed friendship. On the day of the election, the host decided to introduce Amory and Ronov to the students, but even without a second glance, everyone knew that Amory was failing this one, and her magical thread was still stuck without a trigger to release it. As the host introduced Ronov, a blinding light shone on the students from his commanding presence, and they began cheering for him like it was the Taylor Swift concert. By the time he was done serenading them, he began telling them that his intentions for presidency has not changed, and that he intends to make every day a public holiday and would host a pool party in the principal's office every evening. At that instant, the students began screaming his name because they were a bunch of lazy demons who would rather lay in bed all day anyway. But at this realization, the council members thought for sure that Amory was a goner, and Johnny told them that Ronov must have cast the spell on her. With the ugly moron having showed up immediately, she lost her mind. By the time it was Amory's turn, her voice basically passed as being invisible. As she considered quitting, she remembered Iruma's hands, and how he had told her to be brave and to remember her ambitions. And at that moment, the voices went silent in her head. But she began calling herself a worthless, filthy coward who thought that quitting was her only option. However, she was happy to have met Iruma and smacked her microphone in anger. As she announced her desire to fulfill her ambitions, all the students stared in shock, wondering if she had returned to her right frame of mind. So she began telling them that the reason she was still interested in continuing as the president was because of all the expectations surrounding her, and she screamed her desire to make the school the greatest in their world. She told them to be proud of their desires and to achieve it no matter what it takes. As she screamed at them to pull their ugly head out of their ass, the spell finally broke. At that instant, the students began screaming her name, and even Ronov realized that he has lost his only shot. With Amory still trying to clear her thoughts, she noticed Iruma in a flash of light and fell in love with him instantly, hoping that he would remain by her side forever. After the election was over, Ronov began crying over his loss and for the fact that he now has to break up his group. When Johnny began to accuse Ronov of casting a psychological spell on Amory, he tried telling him that he was as innocent as a dove. And just then, Iruma appeared with his friends, telling them that he had caught the disgusting creep who cast the spell on her. As they discovered who he was, Asmodeus began telling them that they had found him inside his cave while he was creating a new perfume to be used on Amory once more. When Johnny demanded to know why he cast a spell on her, the dude told him to get his dead face away from his sight, and began saying that he was Amory's #1 fan. He always had a crush on her, and had been eager for the opportunity to be recognized as her greatest fan. He had held the front line during the election, and had always wished to see her play damsel in distress, so he told her that he was merely satisfying his obsession, and would do it again if given the chance. Realizing he was a disgusting creep, Amory commanded the council members to throw him out instantly. With the ugly weirdo gone, Amory thanked Iruma and his friends for their support, and asked Ronov to join the council members, but the boys abandoned their floodgates in shock. As Amory summoned Iruma, she told him that he has passed his training as a member of the council, and asked him if he would rather become an official member of her group, or would return to his magical apparatus group. Iruma told her to shove her group, saying that he was retiring early, and although he considered the time spent with them priceless, he told her that he wishes to follow his own ambitions, and would be rooting for Kariwo's return. To remain a fair leader, Amory decided to reveal their permit, telling them that they were allowed to return to their group. By the following day, Amory had returned to her routine duty and told her poor council to scream like they were climaxing. That evening, after their friendly phone conversation, Alacrid appeared before Iruma, telling him that Amory was still in love with him and would be willing to finally develop some plot with him. Iruma told him that he was afraid of popping her cherry, but wondered why the spell had taken so long to be broken. So Alacrid told him that he could just go deep inside her plot and find out for himself after releasing all his energy inside her. Meanwhile in the office, Amory had totally fallen in love with Iruma and had begun to imagine their Cinderella wedding. She wondered if he discovered that she was anxious on the phone since he was too moronic to notice all the green lights she's been showing him. She wondered why his ugly face made her want to climax, and thought she must really be in love with him. So she declared a new ambition for herself, deciding to lure him into her world of plot development, and to have his babies so that he would stay with her forever. A few days later, Iruma decided to invite Asmodeus and Clara to his home. All through his human life, he was unable to invite friends over because he was always stuck working his ass off for his ungrateful parents. So for the first time, he was excited and hoped that they would be willing to come. However, he suddenly became anxious and was afraid that they would turn down his kind offer. But Alacrid appeared in that instant, startling him into sending the texts before he was even ready. However, Asmodeus and Clara both accepted to join him, and Iruma realized that there was no going back now. As he grew anxious, he decided to suck up all the dirt, and Alacrid thought that he was domesticated. But the bell startled him at that moment, and he welcomed them inside. As they presented him with their gifts, Iruma freaked out after realizing that Clara's coconut was basically a live fruit. Before long, they prepared to have supper, and everyone welcomed Iruma home from working his ass off at the student council. After their meal, Opera suggested that they play a game to aid their digestion, and showed them the new gaming console that he bought. And realizing it was a dancing game, Iruma thought he would be crowned the new Michael Jackson. But the virtual host told them that it would declare the winner with the highest score. As the game began, they started dancing like disgusting little worms inside a box. By the time it was over, Opera was ranked first place with a score of over 60 million, with Sullivan having taken last place. He realized that he would soon be considered an ugly-faced loser who was better suited for retirement, and that his reputation as an overpowered demon lord would be entirely cast aside. He knew that once he lost this grand opportunity at impressing them, he was sure to never get another. To utilize this opportunity, he suggested that they take a walk around the mansion in a dark parade game, to prove that they were not afraid of the dark. So they started walking through the creepy parts of the mansion. Iruma remembered having played this game in the human world, and thought it was a test of courage. On the other hand, Asmodeus thought it was a silly little test, but hoped that they would come across a monster at the very end. Seeing as there were no pre-planned traps or monsters in the mansion, Opera decided to ask Sullivan how he intends to scare the shit out of them. So Sullivan told him that he has prepared a little trick he intends to use. Before long, he pretended to spot a monster, and warned them not to move a muscle before running off into the darkness. At that moment, they heard a roar and watched as a demon in a Halloween costume appeared before their eyes. Sullivan had worn his pet magic beast in this costume, and had commanded it to pretend like a monster from Halloween, so that he would pretend to obliterate it and regain a little honor to himself. However, as he tried showing off his powers, Asmodeus and Clara appeared before him, deciding to take it on. At once, Asmodeus summoned his dragon and Clara called upon her own beast, but it was an ugly, disgusting creature that could not even bite off the flies on its own tail. As the monster evaded the dragon flames, the sight of Clara's disgusting monster scared the shit out of it, and it immediately ran off into the portal. With the monster gone, they decided to continue their wanderings through the mansion. As they started heading towards the end of the hall, Sullivan began to wonder how he could salvage what was left of his dead and nearly buried reputation. Afraid that they would discover his ugly crybaby photos, he decided to ask Opera for his help in turning his dead luck around, so Opera agreed to help him. As they reached the end of the hall, a monster emerged before their eyes, and its powerful roar nearly blew Iruma away. However, Asmodeus appeared to protect him, and commanded his dragon to spew a flame that merely went through the monster. But Sullivan realized that Opera was merely projecting a monster. With his chance to impress, he began burning up with all the energy in his body, saying that he would protect everyone around him until his final breath. And somehow, it sounded like the coolest speech Iruma had ever heard. As Sullivan rose high into the air, he flew at the monster with a kick, but Opera closed the projector at the same time, making it seem as though his kick had caused it to vanquish. With the monster gone, they discovered a treasure chest before them. Deciding to look inside, Iruma discovered some beautiful fruits, and thought that Opera must have kept them as their prize. However, Sullivan decided to take all the credits for himself, and began saying that he had prepared it as their gift for making it to the deepest parts of the dark parade. However, they could see beyond his bullshit, and began thanking Opera instead, even realizing that the monster was merely a projection. As they started having dinner, Iruma asked his friends to stay with him for a few more hours, afraid of returning to his depressing little world once they were gone. So they agreed to stay with him. After all, their homes were no better, and they lived in a rotten, disgusting shack where everyone would only be glad to have a few extra spaces without them. Inside his room, Iruma began to wonder just what they were meant to do together, because even in his mind, he had not expected they would come this far. However, Asmodeus began to tour the place on his own, and said that he would continue being a creep, and would procure Iruma's exact alarm clock, and start waking up at exactly the same time as him. Even Iruma was spooked by this level of creepiness. Before long, they started hopping on his bed, and were happy to play together. Iruma had never had a moment like this before, and even in the human world, he never imagined that he would. And so he wished that he could preserve this moment forever. That night, after they left, Iruma decided to thank Sullivan for being a better grandfather than his ugly parents, and said that he had a great night all thanks to his moronic attempts to show off that he was a top G. When he left for his room, Sullivan began saying that he was the best grandson in the world, and that he was happy to have abducted him and not any other lazy human. As Iruma tried to sleep that night, Alacrid appeared before his eyes, wondering why he looked so tired. Iruma told him that he had a great time with his friends, and was quickly growing fond of the netherworld. Alacrid asked if he also enjoyed his time working with the student council. Iruma told him that he gained some experience from his time at the council, but could still not figure out how Amory returned to her right mind. He promised to learn more about the monsters, so that he would discover all the secrets surrounding them. However, as he fell asleep, Alacrid thought of giving him a nudge to help in his discovery, so he cast an evil cycle and personality change spell on him, turning him into the male version of Mean Girls. The following morning, when Sullivan and Opera arrived with tea still fresh from yesterday's excitement, Sullivan told Iruma that breakfast has been served. However, Iruma was in no mood for his cap, so he told him to get the out of his room before he kicked his face into an isekai. With his face getting clapped, even Opera threw down his cup in shock. Shortly, Iruma began having breakfast, and Opera wondered what must have taken over his mind. But Sullivan thought that the student council were trying to turn them against each other. While heading to school, his friends began welcoming him like some lord, but he was in no mood for their cap. At once, he handed his bag to Asmodeus, telling him to consider it the greater honor of his worthless life. Accepting it, the moron thought this was his best day ever and promised to protect the bag like his life depended on it. Iruma told Clara that she was becoming a fine woman, but said that her plot were flatter than a notice board.
What did he say?
At once, he ordered for his carriage. Hearing his words, Asmodeus and Clara began wondering if Iruma had woken up on the wrong side of the bed. But he called them into the carriage at that instant. When they arrived at school, he decided to walk inside like he owns the place, and with a single wave of his hand, all the girls left their floodgates entirely open. Inside the class, Iruma was receiving the presidential treatment that only the toppest Gs can have, and all the students wondered how he became an overnight badass. When one student, Shax, asked Clara why Iruma had become unrecognizable, Asmodeus told them that Iruma was having his evil cycle, which was normally meant to happen to demons alone. Just then, Iruma told Clara that he was starting to feel cold, and directed her to warm up his man plot until it was restored to life. And as she did so, all the boys realized that Iruma was in the top 1% of the top Gs. When Asmodeus tried offering Iruma a towel for some additional warmth, Iruma noticed that an awful stench from the hallway was beginning to mess up his luxury paradise. When they came across the douchebags that were dumping trash in their territory, the dumpers told them that they were leaving the trash as an offering, and hurried away. With the others already counting their loss, Iruma cranked his ring and unleashed a monster flame on the trash that frightened the daylight out of everyone. Iruma began telling them that they were the most highly ranked and most powerful students in the school, but were being disrespected and treated like worthless trash. He told them that now was the time to claim their position at the very top of the school, and to begin demanding for their own respect. Meanwhile, inside the school, a group of seniors began calling Iruma a disgusting weak loser who had gotten himself kicked out of the council for being too useless to do anything. But at that moment, Iruma intentionally bumped into one, and all the students grew afraid at the sight of the misfit students. When Asmodeus tried burning off his face, Iruma told him that it would ruin his Christmas photo if he was faceless. However, as he looked him dead in the eye, he told him that he truly was ugly and would ruin the family photos anyways, and they began to leave. Inside the teacher's office, Iruma told Caligo that he was demanding for a classroom change, saying that their cave had been converted into some trash land and that the walls were beginning to decay like a 19th century haunted house. Caligo wondered how he got the moronic idea that they were even considered students of the school in the first place, but Iruma would not give two shits about it, and demanded to know why they were being separated from the other students. Immediately, Caligo summoned the record book and began reading all their aggressive, disgusting records that had caused them to be kicked out to the misfit class. Realizing it was all true, and that they were all a bunch of misfits, Iruma began explaining that the stench from the garbage was becoming unacceptable, and demanded to be moved into the king's classroom, shocking every single one of them. The king's classroom was a locked-up abandoned class that was used by the King Dracula himself before isekai and into a whole new world. However, as an honor to his memory, the class was considered forbidden to everyone and was abandoned for several decades. Looking to defy his request, Caligo told him to return his ass to the cave, and to shut his filthy, disgusting mouth like every other simp. However, Iruma was determined not to be a pushover, so he faced off with Caligo using the power of his ring. He told him that he would submit a signed permission from all the faculty within the school, which was enough to allow them have access into the king's class. Taking it for an impossible task, Caligo told Iruma that he must submit the list within 3 days. At once, Iruma shook his hand, accepting the challenge and promised to get it done. Inside the hallway, the students began to wonder how they would convince the other faculty instructors to accept their request, and they thought it was impossible. However, Iruma believed that he could make it happen, so he led them all to the king's class. As they took in the sight, Iruma began telling them to create a desire for themselves, and to make themselves a candidate for the demon origins. He said that the only way to earn some respect across the school was to occupy the king's classroom, which everyone else had thought was completely impossible. With the class possessing every single thing they could ever dream of, he told them that they would become the most renowned students in the school if they managed to pull it off. When the students began to wonder what plans they would utilize, Iruma told them that they would persuade all the instructors one after the other. The following day, Iruma and Jazz decided to meet Caligo. When he demanded to know what they wanted, Iruma began teasing him on their beast contract, and told him to stamp his request since he was his master. However, the only thing Caligo was willing to do was send a kick into his ass, so he tried stealing the summoning seal from him. But at the same time, Jazz had been waiting for this distraction to utilize his opportunity. His secret ability was the X-ray vision that helped him to easily see and figure out the best possible way to steal his victim's possession without them ever knowing. In his hands were mysterious rings that often alerted his victims, so he always spread his fingers to keep them soundless, allowing them to spread like snakes. And at that instant, he stole Caligo's possession. Realizing this success, Iruma told Caligo that he would give his ugly face a pass, but as they began to leave, Caligo called to him. Afraid they may have been discovered, Iruma and Jazz stood still. However, Caligo was merely interested in the seal, and commanded for it to be returned before leaving. He had not noticed that his diary was missing, and Jazz was happy that he had become a professional pickpocket. Before long, they showed the book to a terrified instructor, and she realized that it contained all of her secret meetings with Caligo. Afraid her secrets were about to be exposed, Jazz told her to stamp their permission form in exchange for the diary, so she stamped it immediately, and the boys were pleased that their first stamp was official. At the same time, Clara and Schneider spotted another instructor in the library, hoping she would not be frightened by their horrendous faces. Clara tried using her doe eyes to convince her, but she was basically invisible, and the instructor was only interested in figuring out the next big theory. However, when Schneider offered her a solution, she wondered where the came from, and how he slept at night with his ugly lion head. Schneider told her that his head was better than her dead brain, and offered to help her in exchange for stamping his permission form. So she agreed and stamped it right away. Outside the school, one student, Paisro, destroyed the ground and transformed it into a farm. When they were done, the instructor showed them their already stamped forms, telling them that it was a pleasure doing business with them.